Fountainhead of modern environmental movement, American biologist Rachel Carson sounded the alarm about the dangers of pesticide in her seminal book, Silent Spring, which still sells more than 25,000 copies every year. Calling for a truce and what she saw as a war against nature, Carson endured an assault against her health by cancer and an assault against her credibility by chemical companies as she sought to remind people of the importance of respecting the balance of nature. In 1907, Rachel Louise Carson was born in Springdale, Pennsylvania, where her father had purchased 65 acres of land, hoping that nearby Pittsburgh would grow towards Springdale. When this did not happen, the family was left financially strained. But because the area remained rural, Carson had the opportunity to spend her childhood taking in the wonders of nature. Intending to become a writer, Carson entered Pennsylvania College for Women, now Chatham College, and majored in English. While fulfilling the college's science requirement, though, Carson became fascinated with the sciences and suddenly switched her major to zoology. After earning her bachelor's degree in 1928, she visited the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where for the first time she saw the ocean. Awestruck, she decided to specialize in marine zoology and earned her master's degree from Johns Hopkins University in 1932. After her father and sister passed away, Carson took her mother and her sister's 2 children. To support the family, Carson applied for a government job and became the first female biologist ever hired by the U.S. Bureau of Fisheries. Her first assignments, writing radio programs and brochures about the ocean, merged her 2 loves, writing and nature. When one of her essays was published in a magazine, she was encouraged to expand it to a full-length book. Carson's book, Under the Sea Wind, was published in 1941, but sold few copies at the time because sales of nature-themed books plummeted after Japan bombed Hawaii's Pearl Harbor later that year. Shortly after World War II, Carson was promoted to editor-in-chief of the Fish and Wildlife Service's Information Division. In her free time, she wrote her second book, The Sea Around Us. Published in 1951, it quickly hit the New York Times bestseller list and remained there for a record 86 weeks. Readers apparently appreciated Carson's way of describing the sea, both scientifically and poetically. She responded, quote, "If there is poetry in my book about the sea, it is not because I deliberately put it there, but because no one could write truthfully about the sea and leave out the poetry," unquote. Now financially secure, Carson resigned from the Fish and Wildlife Service and began writing full-time. Her third book, The Edge of the Sea, became a bestseller soon after it was published in 1955. Later that same year, Carson's niece passed away, leaving her 5-year-old son, whom Carson dutifully adopted. In raising her nephew, Carson took him on many outings to explore seaside tide pools and strove to encourage his sense of wonder of the natural world. She reflected, quote, "The more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for the destruction of our race," unquote. However, such outings became less frequent in 1958 after Carson received a letter from Olga Huckins. Olga, who was an owner of a private bird sanctuary in Massachusetts. Despite Hutchins' objections, the government, as part of a campaign to control mosquitoes, had sprayed her property with insecticide. Immediately following the spraying, Huckins found legions of birds twitching in convulsions or lying dead on the ground, signs that they had been poisoned by the insecticide DDT. Huckins begged Carson to find someone who could prevent the sanctuary from being sprayed again. Try as she might, though, Carson could not find anyone and decided to take up the cause herself. She considered writing a magazine article about dangerous insecticides, but the more she learned, the more she realized that the topic warranted more comprehensive analysis in a full-length book. The concerned author said, quote, "There would be no peace for me if I kept silent," unquote. And she began what would become the pinnacle of her life's work, Silent Spring. Initially titled The War Against Nature, Carson's manuscript explained that before World War II, crop-damaging insects were controlled through biological methods, such as introducing insects' natural predators, or through simple insecticides based on plants or animals or minerals. Carson praised these approaches for, quote, "not doing violence to nature's balance," unquote. After the war, however, these approaches were replaced with products of the synthetic chemical industry. Carson reported, quote, "This industry is a child of the Second World War. In the course of developing agents of chemical warfare, some of the chemicals created in the laboratory were found to be lethal to insects. The discovery did not come by chance. Insects were widely used to test chemicals as agents of death for man," unquote. Carson learned that DDT in particular was dusted on soldiers during the war to control lice. Powdered DDT was not easily absorbed through the skin, but when dissolved in oil, as it usually was for agricultural applications, it was toxic. Insecticides such as DDT not only harmed the target insects, which often developed resistance to its insecticides, they also harmed beneficial insects, wildlife, livestock, and humans who ate contaminated crops or animal products. Furthermore, in humans, there appeared to be a direct link between excessive or repeated exposure to DDT and liver damage and cancer. Sadly, while researching these issues, Carson herself was diagnosed with breast cancer. After having surgery, she underwent radiation treatments twice a week and her hair fell out. Enduring near constant pain, she continued working on her book, began wearing a wig, and kept her illness confidential, lest anyone accuse her of seeking revenge against the chemical companies. On the contrary, Carson did not seek revenge or an end to the use of all agricultural chemicals, just an end to the overuse of the most hazardous ones in order to preserve human health and nature's balance. She warned that the balance of nature cannot be ignored any more than the law of gravity. Renamed Silent Spring in reference to the prospect of a spring without birdsong, the book was published in September of 1962. In the well-documented expose, Carson again blended science and poetry, alternating explanations of the chemical makeup of chlorinated hydrocarbons with poignant passages such as, quote, "Who has decided? Who has the right to decide for the countless legions of people who were not consulted that the supreme value is a world without insects, even though it might also be a sterile world ungraced by the curving wing of a bird in flight? The question is whether any civilization can wage relentless war on life without destroying itself and without losing the right to be called civilized. Within 2 weeks of publication, Silent Spring became a bestseller. Silent Spring had far-reaching effects. In April of 1963, CBS Reports televised an interview with Carson, and although chemical companies tried every angle to discredit her, and 2 sponsors withdrew funds for the broadcast, it aired nonetheless. This telecast prompted the government to take immediate action, and the next day, the U.S. Senate announced that it would hold hearings on pesticide use. During these hearings, Carson testified, quote, "First, I hope this committee will give serious consideration to a much neglected problem, that of the right of the citizen to be secure in his own home against the intrusion of poisons applied by other persons. I strongly feel that this is, or should be, one of the basic human rights," unquote. After the President's Science Committee released a report confirming the warnings that Carson had expressed in Silent Spring, a 2-year investigation of pesticide regulations was launched. Still suffering from cancer and related complications, in the spring of 1963, Carson spent time on the coast of Maine with her friends Stan and Dorothy Freeman. Watching monarch butterflies flutter about, Carson said that she knew it would be her last summer and she would not see butterflies again. Accepting this with equanimity, she later wrote to Dorothy, quote, "When any living thing has come to the end of its life cycle, we accept that end as natural. For the monarch, that cycle is measured in a known span of months. For ourselves, the measure is something else, the span of which we cannot know. But the thought is the same. When that intangible cycle has run its course, it is a natural and not unhappy thing that life comes to its end." In April of 1964, the life of 56-year-old Carson came to an end. Even after Carson's death, her message continued to be taken seriously. A 650-acre park was dedicated to environmental preservation and provides opportunities for quiet enjoyment of the natural environment. This park is in the Brookville area of Montgomery County and was acquired just after Carson's death and dedicated in her memory, the Rachel Carson Conservation Park. On December 16, 1966, Congress established the Coastal Maine National Wildlife Refuge under the authority of the Migratory Bird Conservation Act. In a formal dedication ceremony on June 27, 1970, the refuge was renamed in honor of the scientist and author Rachel Carson, who spent much of her life along the Maine coast. During the mid-1970s, the refuge acquired 4,000 acres and has expanded its boundaries several times over the years to provide coastal salt marshes from encroaching development, and thereby protecting the vital wildlife habitat. The refuge now stretches 50 miles along the coast. In 1970, the Environmental Protection Act was established, and 2 years later, DDT was banned in the U.S., except for use in quarantine, public health, and export. In 1980, Carson was posthumously awarded the President Medal of Freedom, the America's highest civil honor. The medal citation summarized the impact that Rachel Carson had during her lifetime and beyond. Quote, "Always concerned, always eloquent, she created a tide of environmental consciousness that has not ebbed." We will now hear a song written about Rachel Carson, performed by Ellis Paul, and followed with a few more famous quotes.
Rachel went walking in the woods at twilight, talking to the animals, listening to the trees. She heard the beauty in the whistling songbird, the rustling of the hickory, the buzzing of the bees. She wandered, wondering what could she bring to give a voice to the silence of the spring. One day came the big bulldozers, the planes dropping chemicals, the people cutting trees. Rachel saw the bald eagle suffering high up in the canopy to the edge of the sea. She wandered, wondering what could she bring to give a voice to the silence of the spring. And oh, they're tearing the big trees down, they're covering the crops with a cloud of spray, and the bulldozers and the high-rises from town will come so close you can't hear the forest sound. Rachel wrote a book on an old typewriter about the poison in the atmosphere and in the air that we breathe. She told the truth and the world started listening. She was talking for the animals, speaking for the trees. She wandered, wondering what could she bring to give a voice to the silence of the spring.